Do you yearn for travel that involves outdoor adventure and learning? I do. I also have a passion for all things farming and agriculture. I've traveled to exotic jungles to learn about growing chocolate. I even once owned my own organic vegetable and sunflower farm. And now I'm planning my journey back to agriculture. Agritourism, defined as travel that involves some type of agricultural experience. Agritourism is all about entertaining. But the marketing strategist in me knows that, at its core, agritourism is really about educating, and education affects change. My future farm needs to deliver a profound experience to all of its visitors. It needs to educate people about food, health, and climate. Join me to learn from experienced agritourism farmers and entrepreneurs and help me build my future farm strategy. And who knows, maybe one day soon you'll find yourself in a tropical jungle cutting open cacao pods with a machete, or savoring an outdoor plant-to-plate community dinner with 100 guests at a farm in Illinois. So let's tap into the agritourist in you. We did not grow apples at my farm, so during apple season we would purchase apples to have available for our customers. Finding organic apples was impossible, so after some research, we found Eco Certified apples from Fishkill Farms, a farm that was about a 2.5-hour drive from us. However, it was well worth the trip to stock up on healthier, more sustainably grown apples. At the time, I read about the Eco Certification, and it sounded in line with our values. But I have to say that I did not fully understand why I couldn't find organic apples, similar to the certification that we find in the grocery stores. During a podcast interview with the manager and orchardist from Scott Farm in Vermont, the Eco Certification came up once again. They were an Eco Certified apple farm. And that was when I learned that apples east of the state of Washington pretty much can't successfully be certified and grown organically. Why can't they? Well, we explore these reasons in my interview with Michael Rozyne, founder of Red Tomato, the organization that oversees the Eco Certification program for apples and peaches. Funny thing is that Eco Certification is actually tied to Meryl Streep, and you will have to listen to the podcast to learn more about that intriguing story. Turns out that Red Tomato is not just focused on their Eco Certification program, but they are also a food distributor, marketing and education powerhouse, and have recently launched an innovative supply chain project to address food access and affordability. This is Jen Ross, your AgriTourist podcast host. Join Michael and I as we explore how Red Tomato came to be and has evolved to support the changing times. And please don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and leave us a review. Enjoy my conversation with Michael. It's nice to meet you. So I was reading through all the detail of your website. It was lots of interesting information as you dig deeper and deeper. So why don't we just start by you telling me about you and how you got started in 97 with Red Tomato, like how it all began. What was the original vision for the company?
So Red Tomato was really an outgrowth of Equal Exchange, where I was working. I was a co-founder in 1985 of a fair trade coffee, tea, importing and distribution company, worker owned. And I was one of 3 founders. And fair trade food was barely an idea at that point. And so we spent the first 10 years kind of struggling to see if this idea can actually hold water. And it did. And Equal Exchange is, it's a good medium size, still worker owned company today. After 10 years, I felt like I really wanted to address my passion, which was fruits and vegetables. I'm kind of an avid gardener, homestead style, and always have been, always will be until I'm dead and gone.
I have a quick question for you first. When you go back to Equal Exchange, you were importing coffee and tea. And
correct.
And where was that from? Like, where were you importing from? From all over, or because I know that's a whole industry into itself. So
the fair trade industry sector really evolved around relationships, direct relationships with peasant farmer cooperatives. And that was in Central America, South America, Africa, and Asia. We started given that we're in North America, with Central America, and then branched off to South America and eventually the other continents. But it was
Okay.
originally coffee from Nicaragua, um, Colombia, Peru, Mexico, El Salvador, and and then it moved and spread and grew.
Okay. So talk to me about what happened then, how you started this company.
I took a year, and the Equal Exchange kind of generously donated a basement office to me, and I went down there and traveled and met growers in mostly New England, but also other parts of the Northeast, New York, Pennsylvania, and was really trying to adapt a business model to a local environment, to adapt it from what are called grocery products, which is roasted and packaged coffee and tea, to fresh produce. And that was just as challenging as the fair trade side of it. But what does fair trade mean when you're working in the local economy? So that was kind of the challenge. And after a year, I realized there's no way to resolve these questions on paper or even in conversation with growers. Um, so I think what I was good at was having open conversations with growers and understanding kind of their pain points. I'd been in the natural foods industry as a marketer and learned wholesale marketing for over a decade. I was kind of still young and foolish, but not as young and
That's good
foolish as,
sometimes.
yeah, the
We ask
naivete
good questions and like you put yourself out there.
with a
So,
smile.
yes.
Yeah. And when you know they're thinking, who is this clown that you're, they're still in the conversation at least. But Equal Exchange had proved itself really with a very difficult business model that after 10 years, it was kind of interesting. The specialty coffee business was just catching fire in the US.
Okay.
And so was organic. And so we were really able to kind of ride those waves with an idea that people had very hard time wrapping their heads around. Treating the growers fairly. This is a business proposition. And we
Yeah.
had a lot of pushback from people who, in the end, became strong supporters. They just didn't think that business worked this way.
What do you
So
mean? Well, like, give me an example of that. What do you mean? Like, what
business didn't.
happened?
Okay, so let's take two slices of that. One is the investor side, and the other is the customer side. So on the investor side, I think people were pretty game to throw a little support to idealistic, young, and foolish entrepreneurs who are obviously wholeheartedly going for this with every ounce of energy they've got. It's the thing about human relationships. We could get small to reasonable amounts of support from about 30 individuals who contributed the first 100,000 that we needed to launch the company. But many of them told us later that they thought that they were making a contribution to a valid cause that was bound to fail. They didn't really think that differentiating a product on the basis of a direct connection or relationship and support for marginalized producers was really going to carry a business anywhere. But they still would put in one, two, $3,000 and see what happened because of their either personal connection to us or because of their politics.
Okay.
Many of those people, Equal Exchange was seen as a high risk investment, and I wrote the first investment memo that basically said, if you can't afford to lose everything, don't come near us. And that's what investment memos are supposed to do. They're supposed to lay out every possible risk, and ours did that. But some of those people are now with Equal Exchange 30 years later.
Wow.
It's actually 40 years, right?
Wow.
1985,
Nice.
1985. So it's 40 years later. And some of them have put in substantial amounts. Their 3,000 may have become 25 or 50,000.
Great.
And people don't see Equal Exchange as high risk anymore. It's more like one of those interest-bearing savings accounts. because we guaranteed that people would never earn more than 5% a year, but we were going to try to deliver that annually. And for the most part, Equal Exchange has. Um, so, so that's the investor side. On the customer side, we had worked, the three of us were working together in the food cooperative wholesale movement in an organization called Northeast Cooperatives. And we
Okay.
left one by one when Northeast said that the idea of fair trade was too risky for the co-op to own and take. We had offered it to them. We said, we want to build this thing inside of the food co-ops. And they said, too risky. Sorry. So we left and started Equal Exchange. The customers that we went to were the relationships we had. So we started with food co-ops all over the greater Northeast and started to build a market for fair trade inside the food co-ops. Many of those food co-op managers also said to us, I don't know. I like the idea. I like where the money's going. We know we've worked with you for 5 to 10 years, but I don't really see this as a viable, but we'll try it because for the food co-ops, the risk was low. They picked up our products, put them out to sale, used our promotional materials, and either they were going to sell or fail. Not a big risk, but we still had the the skepticism.
Hey, it's Jen, your AgroTourist podcast host. I need to interrupt this podcast for a few seconds. I always want to support the people I interview. So if you're planning on visiting the Berkshires this summer and fall season, Dory Schofield, owner of Berkshire Farm Sanctuary and Save a Pet on Long Island, and myself have partnered up to help her create an Agra destination at her sanctuary. We are starting small with 5 exciting chocolate cocktail hours for all of you chocolate lovers out there. You'll start with a chocolate mocktail or a cocktail and indulge in some delicious charcuterie, plant-based of course. Then you'll be guided through a chocolate experience and learn how chocolate is made from bean to bar. Savor the tastes of real chocolate from all around the world and depart the farmhouse with some of your favorite chocolate bars in hand. Proceeds support all of Dory's rescued animals at the sanctuary. Remember, there are only 5 dates starting Saturday, July 5th, and once they're booked, that's it. So visit berkshirefarmsanctuary.org or heartbeatfarms.com to register now. Thank you for listening, and I will hand you back over to the podcast. What was your mindset at the time when you hear that type? I mean, some people didn't tell you what they were really thinking, but I'm sure you did get some feedback.
We did.
And what made you keep going?
Um, it was it was passion. It was what we wanted to do. There were three of us, which is a really helpful, convenient, supportive environment as opposed to
Yes.
just doing it on your own. And we had lots of people interested in the idea. The skepticism was at the business. We
Yeah.
set this up as a for-profit business. And so I
Yeah.
think no one was doubting that this kind of thing is needed, even in the business world. It was just like, can you really pull it off?
Right.
So, and it was fun. I mean, it was enjoyable. It's what three people wanted to do, and we were meeting great people in Europe who were really helpful to us. The fair trade movement in Holland and other parts of Europe were very much a part of why it worked.
Okay.
So.
So fast forward me, what happened?
So I took that leave and came back in 97, still operating out of the basement there, drinking the great coffee of Equal Exchange, drinking too much of that coffee um, and slowly put the thing together. But I decided to launch Red Tomato as a nonprofit because I knew that produce was going to be much harder than the grocery world with shelf-stable products. And I mean, for example, when we brought in our first load of fair trade coffee at Equal Exchange, Customs seized it. This is during the Reagan years in the White House, and we were legal there was an embargo against Nicaraguan products. We were bringing in Nicaraguan coffee, but we made it legal by having it roasted in Holland with our partners.
Ah,
So it
okay.
came in with a huge, a huge product name, Cafe Nica. We weren't hiding it, we were blaring it. So customs seized it and held it for about 3 weeks.
Wow.
It was vacuum packaged. So it was enormously frustrating and tension ridden, but the product was secure.
Yeah.
Now go to produce, right?
No.
And so instead of specialty coffee with its high prices and higher margins, now fair trade is being translated to local agriculture where a 40-pound bag of box of cabbage is worth about $8 to $9 instead of the 10-pound box of coffee, which is worth 38.50 or and
Yeah.
everything about it was riskier. And so I chose a nonprofit structure. I also had a sense that the philanthropic world was ready for business, for someone who was going to really try to enter the business world with an idea of fair trade and local farmers. In 97, no, it wasn't like 2010 where everyone was afire with desire to support local agriculture. But you could feel it. And and so I felt as confident as one could be that there's support out there. And so I kind of entered the world and just started seeking support for a new organization called Red Tomato, born inside of Equal Exchange, and Equal Exchange gave us office space for the first few years. All those things really made it possible to launch.
Yeah. So how did everything evolve in those first few years?
Um, Started trying to identify other NGO partnerships where we could build markets in key cities where we felt we had a lot of support. So tried to do that in Burlington, Vermont, Philadelphia, and in upper state New York. Um, and so Hartford, Connecticut. That was actually the third. The New York came after that. The partnerships were good, but these NGOs didn't know food marketing. And so ultimately, we pivoted. There are six people who we refer to in our history as the founding sisters of Red Tomato, the first six employees of Red Tomato, who were totally passion driven and on board. And so that was kind of staff of seven. And we really took it to the marketplace. But we pulled back from those cities and just said, look, let's build grower relationships and distribute wherever customers are most interested, where we can do the distribution. So, like almost every food hub, we entered business by trying to set up our own distribution systems.
Okay.
We had strong support from Equal Exchange, also from Oxfam America, and we built coolers. Equal Exchange gave us their dock from the wee hours of 3 in the morning till about 8:30. And then we took their dock back when they shut down around 6 p.m. So we were kind of operating from the early hours of the morning and then tried to do the fundraising and the rest and the administration till like 6 to 8 p.m. and receiving product from growers. So we were just kind of filling the gaps that Equal Exchange gave us and entered the marketplace and served supermarkets in and around the Boston area primarily because we
Okay.
were here with
Which makes
our
sense.
shabby staff of, produce handlers and non-profiteers, and that got us going.
At that time,
And
were you sourcing mostly from local farms
entirely.
entirely? Okay. Both organic and conventional?
Hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you serving Boston and most of your customers were commercial customers. You said like markets and grocers and stuff like that.
Yep. They were
Okay.
supermarket chains, independent supermarkets, food cooperatives, and some food service accounts like universities.
Okay.
We
Good.
did not do much with restaurants at Red Tomato.
Was there a reason for that?
We we didn't have as strong connections. I had a history of retail wholesaling, so there was kind of familiar territory. But I think there's also good reason because restaurants were famously important in getting the local food movement off the ground. But most of the ones that were most supportive are pretty small.
Right.
So practically speaking, it wasn't something we needed. We needed, retail was challenging enough, and we had some pretty good leads.
Okay. So eventually you changed your business. What happened?
So we were actually doing quite well in the business development sense. Got new customers, had enthusiasm. One of the six founding sisters, the first, is Diane Rast, who at the time was Diane Stalford, who is the art director and creative director of Red Tomato today.
Okay.
So Diane's been on board all 28 years, and she came to us from Patagonia, the wilderness clothing company where
Oh,
she was
wow.
art director. So we were this tiny, small nonprofit with a powerhouse of an art department.
I was like, yeah, that's pretty impressive.
She had been traveling around the world doing press runs in the hundreds of thousands, if not, building up to millions, and but she also had a passion. We matched her passion, she matched our passion, and that's really
Nice.
why 28 years later, she's still doing this.
That's
Um,
fantastic. That's
so
great.
I mentioned that because we were able to bring to supermarket customers a level and a quality of promotion and artwork, and we were able to customize point of sale material that they felt really empowered by. And this marks like one of the huge differences between the year 2000, 2005, and 20 years later, where we find we are not able to market collaboratively with many of those giant supermarkets anymore. Through their concentration and evolution, they have centralized so much of their activity in the spirit of cost cutting and efficiency that even if we offer the customized promotional and marketing support, there's nobody there to work with us. And that's not how they merchandise and design education or communication to their customers anymore.
Yeah.
It's only 20 years, but it feels like it's one of the real flashing lights of retail concentration.
Yep.
So
So yeah, what happened?
what happened? So we were growing by the measure of gross sales. We were getting customers. We were doing good things for growers who needed access to markets, but we were still losing money, too much. And the costs, the cost of operating small scale have always been a huge challenge. And so we kind of looked in the mirror around 2002 after an exhausting season. The thing about working those long, grueling hours, grueling in a very physical way, handling produce is really grueling in that sense. Handling super perishables is just stressful.
Yep.
But also living in two worlds. We were the business and we were also trying to administer kind of an educational organization that was raising money in part through philanthropy. And there were very few of us doing all of that. And so at a sobering moment at the end of 2002, we we evaluated and and this was, I think, a uniform staff sense that those famous economies of scale, they were not like waiting for us just around the corner. They were, if they were there at all, they were years and millions of dollars of growth away. Because when you're that small, when you have an opportunity, you need better refrigeration, you need more refrigeration, you need more trucks, you need more drivers, and it just goes on till you feel like, okay, now we have the infrastructure we need. So we said to ourselves, what we're really good at is grower relationships, creating transparent, open relationships with farmers and marketing and promoting. We were pretty good at that.
Okay.
But we did not have um, a sense that our economic situation was within reach, that we were going to reach a break-even moment within a year or two. If we had that sense and believed it, I think we would have kept on keeping on. But we felt like no, it's way down the road there. So what if we did what we're good at, and instead of losing sleep every night over refrigeration, equipment, um, drivers not showing up for work, expensive inputs on every side. What if we actually gave up all the assets, the big assets, and ran a distribution company by managing the logistics that we paid other people to do? So greatly lowered our capital investment needs and tried to keep the customer base that we had, the grower base that we had, and the staff that was operating. So we went for it. We converted into a non, this is jargon, but it's what the industry would call it, a non-asset based distributor.
Okay.
So we're distributing, we're buying and selling produce, we're all about local supply, and we're taking orders and collecting money, distributing it to growers as fast as we can without any of those assets on our books. Took about 2 years to kind of wake up from that potential nightmare dream and kind of say, there's a lot of blood around, but we're we're going to survive this. We're okay. We are learning how to manage that kind of distribution company organization, and our funders are with us. We were able to convert to an organization that pays its bills with about half the income coming from the business and half supported by philanthropy of all kinds and government support of some
Right.
kinds. We actually relied on that less than an awful lot of food hubs, but we did have government support at different times, and it was important. Um, and here we are 28 years later with that business model intact.
Wow. What were some of the biggest challenges to that transition?
Finding reliable transportation partners.
That's what I was gonna, that's what I
Yeah,
thought.
we, I don't know if I'd call them mistakes, but we went through an awful lot of hiccups. I don't think we made actually too many really stupid decisions, but certain kinds of people who had less infrastructure themselves were bound to have limits. And so we had hiccups of that sort. But the produce distribution is full of that. So in some
Yeah.
ways so getting the distribution and logistics right by just experimenting constantly with
Right.
relationships, with different approaches, with different computer systems, with different paperwork, with different kinds of staff. Um, yeah. And it's
So,
not so different than what any small food company would go through. I don't think it
okay.
was unique to our risks and approaches. It's what any
Right.
small entrepreneurial org just has to figure out.
So today, who are you, what market are you serving? Like I know you said you were focused in the Boston area, um, at that, in the beginning. Right now, today, who do you serve?
We
Or
still
where do you
pre
source and who do you serve?
we predominantly are serving a greater northeastern
Okay.
marketplace.
Okay.
And we have been responding to the changes in the food industry. I'd say, there are various moments where you might call them oh shit moments and 2002 was one of them. Another one was 2018. And we looked around and felt like, okay, we've been now operating for over 20 years, and we have done that by having good relationships with customers. So I would say those were personal relationships as much as they were institutional. So the customer itself mattered, of course, good payer, reliable, no funny games, but the people mattered too. And what had happened in those 20 years with so many mergers at retail, with so much consolidation in the industry, and we had gone through these mergers, having this customer who then became owned by this global player, and then we had to go through the changes and try to come out alive,
Right.
and and then lose really good relationships with people who were moving on, retiring, or promoted out of their. So in 2019, I think we said to ourselves, you know what, that model is not viable for us or our growers going forward for the next 10 years. There's too much change, too much consolidation and centralization and scaling up. And even though the population still has strong interest in things local, I wouldn't say that changed a whole lot. There is still really an affection for things local out there. Um, but it's not the number one thing people go in looking for. But it might be, you know, it might be number two, three, or four on a lot of people's lists. And so if it were part of the equation, it would really work to our advantage. At the same time, those chains that survived were in such ferocious competition with each other that their their survival as they talk to themselves. It's always interesting how giant corporations look up and see a bigger one and think of themselves as not being that big. I've been amused to see that. You measure against the size of Walmart, not against the size of your direct competitor, and you feel small and undersized, and so you start thinking about merging. That's why
Yeah.
Stop and Shop, owned by Ahold, merged with Hannaford Brothers, owned by Delhaize, to form Ahold Delhaize, so that they could still be one of the 10 largest global retailers in the world. And, I mean, there are examples of that all over the place.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
so we said to ourselves, we can't, we can't really rest on personal relationships that have been really good with some of these chains. We have to figure out an approach to marketing and distribution uh, that's not so reliant on that, because we're not going to have marketing collaboration anymore the way that we did in
Right.
2005 through 15. And that proved to be, we may have woken up to that 5 years late, but we woke up to it in plenty of time to say, what now?
So what now at that time?
Well, we certainly weren't going to turn away from, we actually did turn away from a couple of customers because we felt like the the new pressure that was being put on us was just unsustainable, unworkable. So we did leave some relationships and kind of sacrifice growth for survival, and just we needed to figure out what smart meant. And I think, we prioritized the Eco Certification program. It was always one of our signature programs, and that's a program for sustainable tree fruit farming. So,
Yeah, talk to me, explain that because I don't think I know when I speak to people about it, like friends, family members, there's not an understanding of, you know, people go into the store and they see organic sticker on an apple or a peach, so they think organic or not. So explain how this certification was born. Like, how did this happen and what is it and why does it exist?
Well, it was born really under another name. If you are an apple grower, and I know you're a farmer, but I kind of assume you're a vegetable farmer.
Yes, I'm more of a
Okay.
vegetable farmer. And the funny thing is, you know how I found out about you guys? Was not
Yes.
from the interview I did, actually. It was from Fishkill Farms because I used to drive up there from Long Island to get their Eco certified apples. And I was like, wow, because at the time, I can't say for now, there were no apple orchards around here that were giving me, you know, the apple that I had desired to sell because we had a mobile farm stand truck and I didn't do fruit at all. So I would go up there like every few weeks I'd take a drive up there like at 4 in the morning and I'd meet them right at their door and they would give me their amazing Eco certified apples. And I'm like, what is this certification? And then when I interviewed the apple orchard up in Vermont, they started talking about it. I'm like, oh, it's come full circle. So, and that's why I really want to understand this more because it's at least where I live, it wasn't a term that I had come across locally. So
And
so go
that
ahead.
so you put your finger on our essential conundrum, which is that the world looks at safe, healthy, and desirable food through a mental construct that's pretty binary. It's through a good, bad, safe, not safe, and organic has done an exceptionally good job of claiming and owning the good, safe mental model, and I'd say and deserves an awful lot of that, and is very happy to own that space in a way that actually doesn't really describe agriculture fully in the United States, right?
That's
So,
important, what you just said, which I
yeah,
did not realize that differentiation at the
most
time.
people don't, and a lot of produce buyers don't. So we have this huge Mount Everest challenge, which is another one of those moments in my career where when I looked in the mirror and said, damn, we've been trying to explain this thing. We've put so much time and energy and our best photography and writers into this thing, and we're still like talking to ourselves because after demos after demo and engaging someone whose eyes are lighting up and you think that you have explained eco certification and the eco program well, they still kind of look and they say, huh, so is it organic? And there's those moments that sent me into the world of social science and a 7-year partnership with a think tank of social science researchers called Frameworks Institute in Washington,
Yes,
D.C.
I downloaded that from your website. The one, what is it about? Uh, the
Farming and
Farming
Food
and
Narrative
Food
Project.
Narrative Project. I started reading that analysis. It's interesting, but
And
it's true.
it's the moment where I we realized at Red Tomato that we got a bunch of struggles here. One is producing fruit in a sustainable way that's as safe as can be
Yep.
done. But the statistic that I heard in your previous interview, I'll change the number a little bit. I think it's actually more than 95% of all the organic fruit raised in the United States comes from Washington.
Okay.
There
Wow.
there may be a little bit from California, but it's a Washington thing from the eastern part of the state where they can raise fruit essentially in a desert with controlled irrigation and thereby manage pests that are are out to get all the farmers east of the Rockies. Humidity and rain leads to plant diseases and insect populations that make apple their preferred dinner, dessert, and beverage. So it's not really understood. But if you're interested in local and sustainable fruit, you're not gonna be able to get that apple that does both those things for you east of the Rocky Mountains very easily. And that's where we step in. So so eco is an approach to sustainable farming that works in the eastern US, defined really broadly. Growers in the Midwest, where do apples come from? After the dominant mountain of apples that come from Washington State, which is a huge portion of US apple production. Then you got to look at New York State, Michigan, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New England as your main suppliers of apples.
Okay.
And apples love cold weather. So we grow that. That's why really the best tasting Honeycrisp tend to come from the north central states. I mean, Honeycrisp was invented in Minnesota, but New York State and New England does just as good a job on the quality side of grazing Honeycrisp. And Washington does a good job, but they don't have quite the cold environment to produce the absolute peak of what a Honeycrisp wants to be. So anyway, here we are. And in another one of our kind of remake moments in 2020, this was right at the time COVID set into the world. We decided that we would offer our Eco Certifiication to all the Eastern growers so that we could become a unified voice trying to explain to the American public what makes good apple good, to talk about farming. And we used the social science relationship and the partnership with frameworks to really dive into the minds of average American consumers so that we could understand how to talk to people who have mental models that make it harder for them to really understand agriculture. And we worked on that for 7 years with frameworks, and the research has been really influential in changing our approach to just talking about farming. And and that's kind of a lifetime project. I mean, I think working on the communication and the narrative side of this is going to be top of our agenda for a long time coming.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of interesting. I didn't read through the whole thing yet, but I'm very interested as a marketer as well. I'm very interested in understanding that research and the findings. So, I just want to go back 1 second. So, what made your organization, take on this certification project? I mean, this is not small. Like,
So I,
there's a lot of pieces to this,
yeah.
to doing this. I mean, I was reading through your certification and, just keeping up with what's going on and all the different standards and the organizations involved in developing those standards and the farms. It's a lot.
So I think you have to go back to this moment in apple history, which every apple grower over the age of, let's say, 40, but maybe those who grew up on the farm will never forget. 1989, it's referred to as the Alar crisis. Alar was a growth hormone that was applied to apples to help keep the apples on the tree. But in 1989, the Natural Resources, it was NRDC, Defense Council, put out scientific report that identified one of the breakdown components of Alar and named it as, I don't know if they named it as when you get to carcinogenicity, cancer causing, there's different levels, suspected, probable, definite. And I don't know what they declared, but basically, when Meryl Streep went on 60 Minutes she was a new mom and she was very interested in health, safe foods. And one of her close friends worked at NRDC, was a scientist there. And when Meryl Streep went on 60 Minutes and alerted the nation that kids are at risk because one of the breakdown elements of alar was a chemical compound that had some relationship to carcinogenicity. People freaked out. And there were periods of time where I think people in the Apple industry were thinking, this could be existential here. This could really take down the Apple and the apple juice industries fast. In the end, it didn't prove that. And in the end, this was a really important moment for Meryl Streep, who to this day refers to this whole period of her life as really one of the um, and I know this because she got a Life Achievement Award at her college, Vassar, and she gave her 20 minutes instead of speaking about her acting career, she spoke about her relationship with the Apple industry. So fast,
Wow.
okay. So to answer your question, Meryl Streep and that scientist spun off an organization, an NGO called Mothers and Others for a Livable Planet. And the mission of this organization was to inform the public, largely through concerned moms, about agriculture. And they started with this focus on apples. Now, I think both Meryl Streep and maybe the NRDC would say we jumped the gun on this. There was, in their point of view, there was really an issue, and I'm trying to kind of leave the technical side of this out, but just to say that this breakdown component was for real. But the threat to the American public was probably overstated. And I think Apple industry would say was definitely overstated and overblown. And I think curiously, 40 years later, this tension still exists in some ways in the science. But the Apple industry definitely suffered. Organic apples got a huge boost, and as did the people who sold those organic apples. But the industry survived, and I think Alar was taken off of the market, and that helped settle down the conflict. And Mothers and Others launched an eco certification called Core Values Northeast. So the people who joined Core Values Northeast were Northeast apple growers and one nonprofit organization called Red Tomato. So we were the marketer. There was this membership of growers. We were the only marketer, and Mothers and Others did what they could to essentially help apple growers grow in a sustainable way that they could name in the marketplace and kind of make their way back to good favor. Mothers and Others didn't survive as a nonprofit. I think, like so many NGOs, NRDC provided some support, and so did Meryl Streep, but they didn't win on the long-term fundraising, and they got phenomenal publicity. If you go back to the food writers of the New York Times in the 1980s, this was the 1990s now, right? Alar was 89. This was mid 90s. This was all happening in the mid to actually the late 1990s. We joined and we met our initial grower team through Core Values Northeast. We still have affection for the program, but when they went out of business, they left a certification with no home.
Ah, okay. Wow, this isn't, I didn't know any of this.
So
Wow.
we picked it up, including relationships with the key growers, and we said to ourselves, we need this. We need something like this. Let's do it our way. And we flipped the priority in the world of marketing. Instead of saying this thing has to be known, let's take all, we didn't have connections to the New York Times. You can imagine Meryl Streep and NRDC were slightly better connected with the media than we were. to put it mildly. But what we were good at was understanding growers and their pain and how to work with them. So we didn't try to get any publicity. We tried to work with a very small number of growers. They had built up quite a stable of grower members who were expecting some kind of market payback, which they didn't do. They didn't develop the marketplace. So we, step by step, tried to begin slowly building a market for what we were calling eco apple. And we did that and slowly built 6 orchards into 15. Today we're approaching 20, but we were always saying this needs to be market driven. Growers need to join because there's a market benefit for them, not just pure hope and promise.
Right.
And
Okay.
so that's
So you have 20 orchards right now?
it varies. Some come and go every year, but we're kind of in that 18 to low 20s range. Yeah.
Okay. And you have peaches too. When did that launch?
That probably launched, I don't have the exact year in my mind, but it was probably 5 to 8 years into it. Puts it
Okay.
back around 2010. It's a natural thing in the Northeast. If you're a peach grower, you're probably an apple grower.
Yeah, I've
If you've
noticed.
got 200 acres of apples, you might have 10 acres of peaches because of the weather risk. You know, there was a moment, as some of our growers remind me, when Connecticut was the number one peach state in the US, way back when. Connecticut, maybe Massachusetts, is about as far north as you can go to get a decent crop most years.
Okay.
And the weather risk is expanding for everyone because even though you may be in the south, extreme weather follows you. And so all it takes is one night of very cold weather and freeze at the wrong time to wipe out a peach crop.
Ugh. That's scary. And did you ever consider berries?
We were in the process of designing a move into blueberries. We wanted to do small fruit. The spotted wing Drosophila had other ideas about our certification. When it became an invasive insect, and you could look this up and find the year really when it showed up. We were building to expand our program. We really need a partnership with growers, scientists who specialize in that fruit, and
Okay.
marketers who are us. So we were working with blueberry scientists, and that year was when, probably, when was this? Probably around 2014, 15, 16. Um, but you could search that and get a really precise
Okay.
notion. When spotted wing Drosophila first entered the US, I think it came through the eastern ports and it came from Asia. There are tons of fruit flies in North America and have been for a long time. But this one, who goes by SWD, really, as you know, right, challenged all small fruit growers.
Yeah.
And IPM, Integrated Pest Management, the platform that a lot of growers use to reduce their pesticides and to use alternative methods of pest control. As one scientist in New Jersey said, my life's work on IPM and blueberries just went down the toilet. And that kind of says how the producers and scientists for a while responded. But there's been a very creative national scientific response to develop new ways to control SWD. But it took years, and I don't think they've even felt like they've arrived yet. So
Okay.
we said, this is way bigger than we are. We're putting this on a long-term pause.
Okay. What are your priorities right now with the Eco Apple and Peach certifications? Like, how would you like to see that evolve?
We've started certifying growers in the Midwest and the Southeast,
Oh, wow. Okay.
and we would like, very slowly, kind of following our MO, which is let the market bring us there. I would like to see slow, steady development in those two regions and the Mid-Atlantic, but we always worked in Pennsylvania. But so Mid-Atlantic, Southeast, and Midwest. And the other important component is brand awareness, where we can make progress explaining eco certification to the trade. It's easier to talk to the trade and to the growers, but we're not, one might say, well, go to the big shows, go to the Great Lakes Expo in Grand Rapids every year. And we've been there. But it doesn't help us to recruit 10 growers when the market is lagging behind. So we are really focused on the market and have taken a new approach it's part of the response to 2018 when we said these relationships at the giant chains are getting really challenging. So then what do you do? And I think we've come around to focusing on mid-sized chains, in some ways balancing the scale because we work with mid-sized farmers. And we feel like, well, actually, this is a light bulb. We should really be focusing on mid-sized chains who have people we can have relationships with. Now, mid-sized, it doesn't need a precise definition. It's kind of not owned by one of the global giants, probably. I mean, you never know. So it's not really a black and white definition, but it's places where there is genuine commitment to supporting local agriculture through retail sales, genuine interest in the eco certification, recognizing it as a sustainable way, as an alternative to organic if they want to combine local and sustainable. And
Right.
third, and this is really important, we can have relationships, collaborative marketing relationships with this company.
That's key.
We can build something together
Yes.
and it will help differentiate them as well as the growers we're working with.
How do I know if it's an eco-certified apple? Besides the farm telling me, which Fishkill Farms at the time, they promoted it. How is there something that's put on the apple? Like, how do you brand it?
Many of the apples carry PLU stickers, price lookup numbers,
Yep.
those lovely little things that every piece of fruit has.
Yes.
Many carry that, not every. It's we just had this conversation today with two orchards. We have stopped short of mandating almost everything. And I'm not talking about the production standards. Those are fixed and
Yeah.
growers, yeah. I'm talking about in the world of marketing and storytelling. At one point, we thought we need to mandate the box that the apples are shipping in. And then we got into this super juicy conversation where some growers said, yeah, that seems like a no-brainer. And others would say, wait a minute, a beautiful three-color box is going to raise my input costs. Convince me that it's worth it. And so we're in this place where we will mandate that when we have the evidence and the collaborative partnership that says we're going to make use of that beautiful. We have a great designer, right? We have kind of a world-class art designer. We can do that, but three colors of ink costs more than one color of ink, which is what maybe the standard is.
Right.
And co-branding with every single orchard separately is a logistical challenge. So we can also
Expensive.
do that. We can do that. We have packaging that we create for the whole network to
Right.
use. And we've gone through some pretty serious narrative changes. Um, we have a presentation that shows how we described eco production in the early aughts, 2000s, and what the new package says in contrast, integrating all this information from Frameworks Institute. And, we've come a long way and we got a long way to go in terms of simplifying the words we use to just put this out there.
Yeah.
So
I just wanted to quickly reference something. I'm going to be mindful of your time. So you had in your website, I found this. It said this was a study I guess you did a while back, but it stood out to me. It said our commitment to a positive environmental impact has shown real results. A 2017 analysis of audit records showed the use of high-risk chemicals among 5 eco-certified orchards had decreased 59% since 2004 and has continued to drop 18% since 2010. So you you saw an impact on less chemical or high risk chemical usage. Have you done any more of those studies? I mean, this was back in 2017. So I was just wondering if you've done that analysis in the more current state or
No,
years. Okay.
it's expensive and it's extremely variable by the kind of weather. Like the amount
Yeah.
of an insecticide or a fungicide will vary quite a bit year to year. So you don't want to just do a 1 year blast. You really need to look over a long period of time and you
Okay.
want to look over. So here's somewhat of an alternative to that is that we have close relationships with ag scientists at at the universities where our growers frequent. So Cornell's really important, University of Massachusetts. At different times, it's been University of Connecticut, at times Penn State, University of Maine. And through those partnerships, like for example, right now, we we have an annual meeting with our growers. It's in the winter, and it's where we have the most difficult conversations about where we're heading. So we feel like we've been under a lot of pressure to do something to reduce the use of neonicotinoids, which are the world's largest class by use of insecticides. And the reason it's used so much is because it's used heavily on row crops like soybeans and corn and
Okay.
cotton. And um, the inside word, people call them neonics. But the reason that they've become in the public eye to some degree is that they've been identified as a threat to pollinators and bees. And people really care about bees. And
Yep.
so over the last 5 years, there's been a growing momentum to make agriculture safer for bees and for pollinators. And we've gotten some serious interest from some of our best customers to do that, to join in. Now, there are a bunch of different neonics, and we spent a couple of years teeing this discussion up and talking to our growers. And so the industry came out, industry meaning the retailers, and not as a unified voice, but many of them said, hey, there's a subclass of neonics called nitroguanidine neonics. And I think anybody listening to this probably doesn't want to go into the weeds that far, but they should know that those include some of the most commonly used ones that are used on the row crops, heavily in the Midwest, in the South.
Yeah.
In apples, there is one neonic in particular that is not one of those preferred targets. And so what we have done to to kind of stay ahead of this curve is that we just approved over 3 years a phase out of three of the most commonly, most heavily used neonics while allowing one to remain in our Apple protocol because we don't have a good substitute for it and because it's been shown to be less toxic to pollinators than that subcategory
Right.
called nitroguanidine. So there's a really tangible example of our approach to staying ahead of the curve. Um, we got rid of all the organophosphate insecticides way before they were ruled out by the EPA of agriculture, many, many years beforehand. And we feel like we're trying to stay ahead of the curve while respecting growers' needs to have alternatives.
Right.
Growers are not wedded to particular chemical use. They're wedded to growing good fruit. So when there are alternative solutions, they're very open to it, very open to experimenting, even if there's some economic risk. But we can't just quickly and suddenly ban things um, without regard to what next.
Yeah, it's very important for the industry. So before I let you go, I do want to ask you about the bypass project. That I really loved reading about that. So why don't you just tell us what that is, how it was born, and you know, how you're supporting the community.
Yeah. So the bypass project, I'd say, is our other um, signature project. You know, when we've kind of simplified and narrowed things down, but it's really important to, I think, our identity. So uh, we have always paid attention to marginalized communities and never prioritized them as a target. Other than the interesting thing about eco fruit is that it's way less expensive than organic fruit. And so by having an alternative high quality fruit that we could sell in supermarkets, there was there was a nod and a step in the direction of affordability. But about 5 years ago, we felt like, we've got this logistics expertise and seeing what's happened to supermarkets and it doesn't feel like supermarket growth and expansion is going to really move into lower income communities. And we felt like I think we can work with people and bring growers into the conversation and bypass conventional distribution systems that are pretty much ignoring those communities. So that's where the word bypass comes from. The leadership on this is coincides with the ascension of Angel Mendez, who, when we shut down our distribution system in 2002, we laid off all the truck drivers and warehouse workers except one. And that was Angel
Angel.
Mendez in his early 20s. And he stayed and moved into the offices and over the years worked so many different jobs, became director of operations, then became director of operations and finance, and then in 2019 became executive director.
That's terrific.
And I hope I got my dates right on the 2009. I think I do with 2019. And so Angel, who has been on the ride almost from the beginning, runs Red Tomato now, which gives me the privilege of focusing on projects that are most challenging and interesting to me, like Eco Certified. So Angel leads Bypass. He grew up in an urban area inside Boston. Um, he has a very different background than me and other staff, and I think this really speaks to his passion for. He always says, when I was growing up in the projects of Boston, if I could look out in time and see myself like traveling on all these farms and having all of these relationships with farmers in the most rural areas, I would just have like freaked out. Um, but he is a learning animal, and he got his degree, first person in his family to get that degree while working at Northeastern while working days at Red Tomato. And so kind of very slowly became this kind of urban agricultural human being. So he leads
Excellent.
the program. It started with relationships with organizations in Hartford, Connecticut, and Bridgeport. And we are now being approached by communities in other parts of the country who are interested in making logistics and distribution part of their vision for how to build a better food system for their communities. So we've been working in the Panhandle of Florida with groups. new relationships in Texas and with the I think it's the Oglala Sioux in North Dakota.
Wow.
So I'm not directly involved. I'm kind of watching from the box seat that I am privileged to have, but the staff have been out assessing and Buffalo, New York is important. Buffalo, New York community, that's been a year-long investigation. We're trying to figure out how much can we do? How much capacity do we have? How much support can these other partners bring to it? But it feels like distribution and logistics is really an important link and relationships with farmers. And so that's something we can add to the mix.
Excellent. It's really, really important. And I think I've spoken to some other people who not doing the same thing, but the thinking is the same. You're all on the same page. It's just, getting some scale. But you're all doing similar things in your community. So I think it's terrific what he's leading. So congratulations to him. I have two final questions for you. One, if a farm is interested, an orchard is interested in becoming eco certified, what would they do?
We're a really small staff, so they can contact info@redtomato.org or Susanna Hinman or Michael Rozyne at Red Tomato. So we all use our first initial and last name. So that would be S. Hinman, Hinman at redtomato.org or M. Rozyne, Rozyne at redtomato.org. And as simple as here's who I am, here's what I'm interested in. Please send me more information.
Excellent. And what's your favorite apple? Over all these years, you've probably tasted a bunch of them.
It is.
Do you have a favorite?
Yeah. Right now, I think many of us on the team, it's winter, right? Or it's spring. So we've been really surviving the winter eating Evercrisp, which is,
Yes.
have you had an Evercrisp?
I have had an Evercrisp. Yes.
It stores fantastically and it's very, very rock hard and it has just great flavor. If it has its cynics, they say it's an ugly apple, and I feel like no, it's not. It's just not a super shiny, it's an all red apple. I think it makes it, and we're working hard to commercialize it. So
Okay. Excellent. Well, Michael, it's been a pleasure. I have learned so much from you, and I know I'm going to have more questions outside. So definitely, I want to stay in touch. This has been extremely interesting. And what's really intriguing to me is that communication with the consumer and education that needs to happen more. So I am interested in reading the research that was done and the results that came out of that for my own purpose. But I think the communication aspect is critical. So I will definitely help spread the word though.
what is a good story has become a really major part of our presentation of the scientific research because frameworks didn't go there with us. And so, but I've built that into our workshops and everything because I feel like it's so important and unappreciated in terms of like when you're telling farm stories, it's not just about how cool this or that is. It's like you need emotion, man. You need a story in the story. So that might be another conversation, but it's really nice to meet you.
I hope our AgriTourist podcast prompts you to think more about where your food comes from, whether it be your vegetables, fruits, meats, and even those sweet treats. Don't forget to subscribe and share this podcast with someone you think may truly benefit from or be inspired by it. Visit us at agra-tourist.com. Until next time. So I was recently listening to one of the Grounded in Maine podcasts produced by Amy Fagan. The podcast is an open conversation about being mindful about how we show up in the world. It's focused on sustainability and how sustainability impacts every part of our life. What are some of the most important takeaways that people will get from your podcast?
One of the things that I hope that people will take away from the podcast is encouragement. Like, I want them to not feel like you have to spend thousands of dollars to be part of the solution, because, there are a lot of sustainable, things that say sustainability or sustainable, like solar panels or organic cotton and stuff like that. Like, some things are just more expensive because they have that tagline, that phrase or whatever. But there are so many ways that you can be sustainable. You just have to be a little bit creative. And so I'm putting out all these ideas that what people are doing, just to put the thought out there that we can all be part of it without going broke.
So how can people find your podcast?
My podcast is wherever podcasts are found. It is just called Grounded in Maine. I also have my Instagram is where I am most active, and the Instagram handle is Grounded in Maine Podcasts.